The blizzard that tore through northern Arizona territory in December of 1884 was unlike anything the residents of Fort McDowell had seen in 20 years, and Elena Burke was dying in it. She collapsed on the stone steps of the Methodist church just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, her threadbare dress offering no protection against the wind that cut through the valley like 1,000 knives. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, her lips were blue, and she could barely feel her legs anymore. The stage from Phoenix had broken an axle 15 miles back, and the driver had told all the passengers to walk if they wanted to survive. Most had stayed with the coach. Elena had chosen to walk, thinking she was strong enough. She had been wrong. Through her dimming vision, she saw a figure moving through the white curtain of snow. A man on horseback, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind, his hat pulled low. She tried to call out, but her voice was nothing more than a whisper swallowed by the storm. Her eyes closed. Grant Coleman had been riding back from checking his cattle when he spotted the dark shape on the church steps. At first he thought it was just a bundle of rags blown there by the wind, but something made him dismount and investigate. When he brushed the snow away and saw her face, pale as death, his heart lurched. "Madam, can you hear me?" He pressed his fingers to her throat and felt a weak pulse. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He kicked open the church door, grateful that Reverend Patterson never locked it, and carried her inside. The church was dark and cold, but at least the walls blocked the murderous wind. Grant laid her on one of the wooden pews and immediately started removing her frozen outer layers. Her dress was soaked through, ice crystals forming in the fabric. This was bad, very bad. He knew what happened to people who stayed in wet clothes during a blizzard. He had lost his younger brother to exposure 5 years ago, and he would be damned if he let this woman die the same way. His hands worked quickly, removing her sodden coat and the outer layer of her dress, leaving her in only her thin chemise. He stripped off his own heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then pulled her against his chest, using his body heat to warm her. "Come on," he murmured against her hair. "Do not give up on me." Her eyelids fluttered. That was good. He rubbed her arms vigorously, trying to get her blood flowing again. Her skin was like ice. "That hurts," she whispered, and he nearly laughed with relief at hearing her voice. "Good, that means you are still alive." He kept rubbing, even as she whimpered. "What is your name, Elena?" "Elena Burke." "Well, Miss Burke, I am Grant Coleman, and you are about the most foolish woman I have ever met. What were you doing out in this storm?" The stage broke down. Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "I thought I could make it to town." "You nearly died on church steps instead." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms tight around her. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. There was no way he could get her to the doctor in this weather. They were stuck here until the storm passed. Elena became slowly aware of several things. First, she was pressed against the chest of a man she did not know. Second, she was wearing very little clothing. Third, she was still freezing despite the warmth radiating from his body. And fourth, his heart was beating steady and strong beneath her ear, and somehow that sound made her feel safer than she had felt in months. "I am sorry," she managed to say, "for the trouble." "Hush, save your strength." His voice was deep and rough, with a gentleness that surprised her. His hands continued their brisk rubbing along her arms and back. "We need to get you warmer. This is not working fast enough." He stood, still holding her, and looked around the church. There was a small room off to the side where the Reverend prepared for services. Grant carried her there and found, to his immense relief, several thick blankets stored in a cabinet. He laid her down and wrapped her in all of them, then lay down beside her and pulled her back against his chest, cocooning them both. "This is highly improper," Elena said, but there was no real protest in her voice. She was too cold to care about propriety. "Would you rather freeze to death properly?" Grant asked, and felt her shake with what might have been laughter. "No, I suppose not." They lay there in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Gradually, Elena felt warmth returning to her limbs, though it came with a painful tingling sensation. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Talk to me," Grant said. "Where were you headed, Fort McDowell?" "I am supposed to start a teaching position after the new year. A school teacher." He sounded approving. "We need one. The children here have been without proper education for 6 months since old Mrs. Henderson passed." "That is what I heard. I came from Boston." "Boston." He whistled low. "That is a long way. What brings a Boston lady all the way out to the Arizona Territory?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "A fresh start." Something in her tone told Grant not to press further. Everyone who came west was running from something or towards something. Usually both. "Well, you picked a hell of a way to arrive," he said. "Nearly freezing to death on your first day." "I have always been dramatic." This time he definitely heard the smile in her voice, and it did something strange to his chest. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Grant kept Elena wrapped tight against him, monitoring her breathing, her temperature. She had stopped shivering, which was good. Her skin felt warmer to the touch, but they were still trapped in a church in the middle of a blizzard, and he had no idea how long it would last. "Tell me about yourself," Elena said quietly. "If I am going to be pressed against you all night, I should know something about you." "Not much to tell. I have a ranch about 3 miles from here. Raise cattle mostly. Lost my parents when I was young, raised my brother until—" He stopped. Until I lost him too, 5 years ago, storm like this one." Elena's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed. "I am sorry." It was a long time ago, but his voice was tight. "Anyway, it is just me now. Me and about 200 head of cattle who are probably huddled together somewhere right now, cursing my name." "Do cattle curse?" "Mine do. They are very opinionated." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and Grant found himself smiling in the darkness. As the night wore on, they talked. Elena told him about Boston, about her family who had died in a fire 3 years ago, about the man she had been engaged to who had stolen her inheritance and left her with nothing. She told him about the advertisement she had seen for a teaching position in Arizona Territory, about how she had sold everything she owned to buy a ticket west. Grant told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father teaching him to ride before he could walk, about his mother's cooking that could make strong men weep. He told her about finding his brother's body after a storm, about the guilt that still ate at him for not going out sooner. "It was not your fault," Elena said firmly. "I know that in my head. My heart has a harder time believing it. Hearts are stubborn things, that they are." Somewhere around midnight, the storm finally began to weaken. The howling wind dropped to a steady moan, then to a whisper. Grant carefully extracted himself from the blankets and went to look outside. Snow had piled up against the church door 3 feet high, but the sky was starting to clear. Stars peeked through gaps in the clouds. "How does it look?" Elena asked from the other room. She had wrapped herself in the blankets and came to stand beside him. Her hair had dried into a tangled mass of dark curls around her face, and in the dim light filtering through the windows, Grant thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Storm is passing. We should be able to make it to town by morning." He turned to look at her properly for the first time. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 23 or 24. Her face was delicate, with high cheekbones and large dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. She still wore only his coat over her chemise, and he quickly looked away. "Your dress is still wet," he said. "You cannot wear it." I do not have much choice." Grant thought for a moment, then went back to the Reverend's room and rummaged through the cabinet. He found an old cassock that the Reverend must have used for ceremonies. It was too large, but it would do. "Here, wear this." Elena took it gratefully and disappeared into the other room to change. When she emerged, she looked like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. The cassock hung to her ankles and the sleeves covered her hands. Grant had to suppress a smile. "Not a word," she warned, but her own lips were twitching. "I would not dream of it." They settled back into the blankets, though this time they kept a modest distance between them. The impropriety of their situation was starting to sink in now that Elena was no longer in immediate danger of freezing to death. "This is going to cause talk," Elena said quietly. "Probably. I am supposed to be the new schoolteacher. I need to maintain a certain reputation." Grant was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised them both. "Marry me." Elena sat up so fast the blankets fell away. "What? Marry me today, as soon as we can find the Reverend?" Grant sat up too, his face serious. "Think about it. We spent the night alone together in a church. When people find out, and they will find out because this is a small town and everyone knows everything, your reputation will be ruined. You will lose your teaching position before you even start. But we barely know each other. We know enough. You are educated, kind, and brave enough to cross a country alone to start a new life. I am a rancher with a decent income and a strong back. We could do worse." "That is insane." "Maybe, but it solves both our problems. You get to keep your reputation and your job, I get." He hesitated. "I get to stop being alone." Elena stared at him. In the growing light of dawn, she could see him clearly now. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His eyes were blue, striking against his tanned face, and there was both strength and sadness in them. He was older than her, maybe 30, but not so much older that it seemed strange. "This is crazy," she said again, but her voice was uncertain. "Crazy would be throwing away your new life because we did the sensible thing and kept each other alive during a blizzard." Grant reached out and took her hand. "I am not asking for love, Elena. I am asking for a practical arrangement that benefits us both. We can figure out the rest as we go." She looked down at their joined hands. 24 hours ago she had been on a stage, alone and uncertain but hopeful about her future. Now she was sitting in a church wearing a cassock, holding hands with a cowboy who had saved her life and was proposing marriage. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was also, somehow, the first thing that had felt right in years. "All right," she heard herself say. "Yes." Grant's face broke into a smile that transformed him entirely. "Yes. Yes, but on one condition. Name it. We take our time getting to know each other properly. This might be a practical arrangement, but I would like to at least try to make it a good marriage." "That seems fair." He squeezed her hand. "I can promise you this, Elena Burke. I will never lie to you, I will work hard to provide for you, and I will do my best to make you happy. That is all I can offer. That is more than many women get." She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and something passed between them in that moment. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. When the sun finally rose over Fort McDowell, it revealed a town buried in snow. People emerged from their homes to begin digging out, marveling at the depth of the drifts. Reverend Patterson made his way to the church, concerned about damage from the storm, and found Grant and Elena waiting for him. Good Lord! The Reverend was a small man with kind eyes and graying hair. "Coleman, what are you doing here? And who is this young lady?" "This is Elena Burke, the new schoolteacher. I found her freezing on your steps last night. We have been here since, waiting out the storm." Grant stood tall, his hand still holding Elena's. "We would like you to marry us, Reverend. Today, if possible." Reverend Patterson's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Marry you, but you just met. We have spent the last 12 hours getting to know each other, and we have decided this is what we want. Grant's voice was firm. Will you do it? The Reverend looked between them, taking in Elena's borrowed cassock, the rumpled blankets in his preparation room, the way they stood close together. He was not a fool. He understood immediately what Grant was trying to do. Have you really considered this, Miss Burke? He asked gently. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly. I understand that, Reverend, but I believe this is the right choice. Elena's voice was steady. Grant saved my life last night. I know that does not obligate me to marry him, but in the time we have spent together, I have found him to be a good man. That is more than I can say for many men I have known much longer. The Reverend studied her face, then nodded slowly. Very well, but I will need witnesses. Let me send for a few people. Within an hour, a small group had gathered in the church. Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife, had brought a dress for Elena to wear, simple blue calico that fit reasonably well. She had also helped Elena wash and pin up her hair. Several of the town's leading citizens had been rounded up to serve as witnesses, including the mayor, the doctor, and the owner of the general store. There was much whispering and speculation, but Grant's steady presence and Elena's quiet dignity kept most of it at bay. The Reverend conducted a simple ceremony, and when he asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both answered clearly, I do. Grant kissed her briefly, just a soft press of lips that still managed to send warmth through Elena's entire body. Then it was done. She was married. To a man she had met less than 24 hours ago. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely calm. After the ceremony, several people approached to offer congratulations, though Elena could see the curiosity and speculation in their eyes. Mrs. Patterson, a kindly woman with iron-gray hair, took Elena's hands warmly. Welcome to Fort McDowell, my dear. I know this must all seem very sudden, but Grant Coleman is one of the finest men in this territory. You have made a good choice. Thank you, Elena said, meaning it. Dr. Harwood, a balding man with sharp eyes, checked Elena over to make sure she had suffered no lasting effects from her exposure. You are lucky Coleman found you when he did. Another hour and we would have been planning a funeral instead of celebrating a wedding. Grant had been standing nearby talking to the mayor, but at those words he came to Elena's side immediately. She is all right, though. She will be fine. Keep her warm, make sure she eats well, and she should be fully recovered in a day or two. The doctor gave them both a knowing look. I am sure you will take good care of her, Coleman. After everyone had left, Grant and Elena found themselves alone in the church again. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the snow outside sparkle like diamonds. Well, Mrs. Coleman, Grant said softly. Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Coleman. Elena tested the name. That will take some getting used to. We both have a lot to get used to. He offered her his arm. Come on, let us go home. The ride to Grant's ranch took over an hour, even though it was only 3 miles, because the snow was so deep. Grant had borrowed a small sleigh from the livery, and they glided over the white landscape, wrapped in blankets. Elena was grateful for Grant's warm presence beside her. When the ranch house came into view, Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. This was going to be her home now. She studied it carefully. It was a solid structure, built of wood and stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney from which smoke rose. Outbuildings dotted the property, and she could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the white snow. It is not fancy, Grant said, sounding almost apologetic, but it is sturdy and warm. It looks perfect, Elena said honestly. Grant helped her down from the sleigh and led her inside. The interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large fireplace taking up most of one wall. Simple furniture was arranged around it, everything practical and well made. A door led to what she assumed was the bedroom. "I will sleep out here," Grant said quickly, following her gaze. "The bedroom is yours." Elena turned to look at him. "Grant, we are married. In name. You said you wanted us to take our time getting to know each other properly. I meant it when I said I would respect that." His face was serious. "I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for." Something in Elena's chest loosened. "Thank you. Now you must be hungry. Let me see what I can put together for breakfast." As Grant moved around the kitchen, Elena explored the house. It was clean but sparse, with few personal touches. The bedroom was simple, just a large bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. Through the window she could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks white with snow. She heard Grant call that food was ready and returned to find the table set with bacon, eggs, and fresh bread that he must have baked himself. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from their long night. After breakfast, Grant showed her around the property. He introduced her to his ranch hand, Miguel Torres, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for Grant's father before him. Miguel's eyes widened when Grant explained that Elena was his new wife, but he recovered quickly and welcomed her warmly in accented English. "It is good," Miguel said, nodding at Grant. "The boss, he needs someone, too much alone." Grant looked embarrassed but did not deny it. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Elena slept in the bedroom while Grant made a bed on the sofa in the main room. They ate meals together and talked in the evenings by the fire. Grant taught her about ranch life, and Elena told him stories about Boston. They were careful with each other, polite, slowly building the foundation of something that might become real. Elena was supposed to start her teaching position after the new year, which gave her 2 weeks to settle in. Mrs. Patterson came to visit and brought several other women from town, including Mrs. Sarah Monroe, who ran the boarding house, and young Alice Foster, whose husband owned the saloon. They brought fabric and helped Elena make new dresses, since she had lost everything when she abandoned the stage. "How are you settling in?" Mrs. Patterson asked as they sewed together by the fire. "It has been an adjustment," Elena admitted, "but Grant has been very kind." The women exchanged glances. Alice, who could not have been more than 20, leaned forward conspiratorially. "We all think it is terribly romantic, you know, like something from a novel. The handsome rancher saving the beautiful stranger, a midnight wedding." "It was not quite midnight," Elena said, but she was smiling. "Still, you are lucky. Grant Coleman is a good catch. Half the single women in the territory have been trying to snare him for years." This from Mrs. Monroe, a practical woman in her 40s. "I did not snare him," Elena protested. "No, dear, he snared you." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "And that makes it even better." As the days passed, Elena found herself growing increasingly comfortable in her new life. Grant was an easy man to live with. He was quiet but not sullen, hardworking, and unfailingly considerate. He brought her coffee every morning before he went out to tend the cattle. He asked about her day over dinner. He made her laugh with dry observations about his animals, and he never pushed her, never made her feel pressured or uncomfortable. He was keeping his word about giving her time, and Elena appreciated it more than she could say. But as she grew more comfortable, she also became more aware of him. The way his shoulders moved when he chopped wood, the sound of his voice when he talked to the horses, the rare, brilliant smile that transformed his serious face. She found herself watching him, wondering about him, wanting to know more. On Christmas Eve, exactly 2 weeks after their wedding, a heavy snow began to fall again. Nothing like the blizzard that had brought them together, but enough to keep them inside. Grant built up the fire while Elena prepared dinner. They had roasted a chicken, and Elena had attempted to make a pie with dried apples. It turned out slightly lopsided, but Grant ate 2 pieces and declared it the best pie he had ever tasted. "You are a terrible liar," Elena said, laughing. "I am not lying. It is delicious. It is burnt on one side. The burnt part is my favorite." She threw a dish towel at him and he caught it easily, grinning. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Grant pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I know we said we would not do gifts," he said, looking almost shy, "but I saw this in town and thought of you." Elena unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a book, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. She opened it and saw that Grant had written an inscription on the first page in careful handwriting. "For Elena, who is braver than she knows. Christmas 1884. Grant." Her eyes stung with tears. "This is beautiful. I did not get you anything. You married me. That is gift enough." He said it lightly, but there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I have something for you too," she heard herself say. "Not a thing, but something I have been thinking about." "What is it?" Elena set the book aside and moved closer to him on the sofa. "I have been thinking about our arrangement, about taking our time." "Yes, I think we have taken enough time." Her heart was pounding. "I know it has only been 2 weeks, but I feel like I know you. And I want this to be a real marriage, Grant, not just in name." Grant went very still. "Elena, you do not have to do this." "I know I do not have to. I want to." She reached out and took his hand. "I want to try to build something real with you. I want us to be husband and wife in truth." He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of 2 weeks of careful restraint finally breaking down. Elena made a soft sound and kissed him back, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I am sure." He stood and held out his hand. Elena took it, and he led her to the bedroom. This time, when he closed the door behind them, she was not alone on the other side. The months that followed were among the happiest of Elena's life. She started her teaching position in January. And though some of the parents had been skeptical at first about the young teacher with the unusual wedding story, she quickly won them over with her dedication and skill. She loved teaching, loved seeing the children's faces light up when they mastered a new concept. Grant continued to work the ranch, but now he came home every evening to a warm house and a wife who greeted him with genuine pleasure. They fell into an easy domestic rhythm, cooking together, reading together, talking about their days. And at night, they came together with a passion that surprised them both. What had started as a marriage of convenience was becoming something much deeper. Spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the landscape green. Elena discovered she was pregnant in April. "Are you happy?" she asked Grant nervously when she told him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and his arm was around her shoulders. "Happy." Grant pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Elena, I have been alone for 5 years. 5 years of coming home to an empty house, eating meals in silence, sleeping in a cold bed. Then you appeared in my life like some kind of miracle, and now you are giving me a child." Happy does not begin to cover it. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she was smiling. "I love you. I know we said this was just practical, but I love you. I love you too." He turned her face toward him and kissed her properly. "I think I have loved you since I found you freezing on those church steps, and you still had enough spirit to tell me I was hurting you when I tried to save your life." She laughed through her tears. That was not a very romantic first meeting. It was perfect. He laid his hand over her still flat stomach. Everything about us is perfect. The baby, a boy they named James after Grant's father, was born in December of 1885, exactly 1 year after Grant and Elena's dramatic wedding. The labor was long and difficult, but Elena came through it with Dr. Harwood's help, and when Grant finally got to hold his son, he wept. "He is so small," he said, looking down at the tiny red face. "He will grow," Elena said from the bed. She was exhausted but radiant, just like we did. Grant looked at her, at this woman who had come into his life during a blizzard and changed everything. "I am the luckiest man alive. We are both lucky." She held out her arms and he came to her, still holding the baby, and they sat together as a family, complete and whole. Life was not always easy. Ranching was hard work, with droughts and harsh winters and the constant threat of cattle rustling. Elena continued to teach, balancing her work with caring for James. There were difficult times, arguments and struggles, moments when they both wondered how they would make it through. But they always did, because underneath everything was the solid foundation they had built that first night in the church. They had chosen each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and that choice had become commitment, and commitment had become love. James grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's easy smile. When he was 2, Elena gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, and then 2 years after that, another son named Thomas. The house that had once been so empty and silent was now filled with noise and laughter and life. Elena had to give up teaching after Mary was born, but she found she did not miss it as much as she thought she would. She still tutored students privately sometimes, but her real joy was in her family, in watching Grant teach their children to ride, in reading them stories by the fire at night, in the 1,000 small moments that made up their days. Grant expanded the ranch, hiring more hands and increasing the herd. He was a good businessman and a fair employer, and the ranch prospered. They built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Grant insisted on building Elena a library too, a small room lined with shelves that he slowly filled with books. "You gave up so much to come here," he said when he showed it to her. "Your education, your dreams of teaching. I want you to have a place that is just yours." Elena looked around the room, tears in her eyes. "Grant, I did not give anything up. I gained everything." On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the church where they had married. Reverend Patterson was still there, though grayer now, and he smiled when they walked in. "I wondered if I might see you two today," he said. "We wanted to thank you," Grant said, "for taking a chance on us that day, for marrying 2 strangers who had just spent the night in your church." "I did not marry strangers," the Reverend said gently. "I married 2 people who had already decided to commit to each other, to work hard at building something good. That is really all any marriage is. The love comes later if you tend it properly." "We tended it," Elena said, squeezing Grant's hand. "I can see that." The Reverend looked at them with satisfaction. "You have a beautiful family, a good life. I am glad I could play a small part in it." They sat in the church for a while, in the pew where Grant had first held Elena and warmed her back to life. The winter sun streamed through the windows, just as it had that morning 10 years ago. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked quietly. "Saying yes to a crazy proposal from a man you had just met?" Elena thought about it seriously. "Sometimes I wonder how different my life would have been if the stage had not broken down, if you had not found me, if you had not asked. But regret it? Never. This life we have built together, our children, our home, everything we are to each other. How could I regret any of it? I think about what would have happened if I had not checked the cattle that day, If I had stayed home because of the storm, you would have died on those steps. But you did go out. You did find me. And you saved me in more ways than one." She turned to face him fully. "I was running away when I came here, Grant. Running from grief and betrayal and a life that had fallen apart. I thought I was coming to teach school to start fresh. But what I really needed was you. A good man who saw me at my lowest and still thought I was worth saving. You saved me right back." His voice was rough with emotion. "I was dying out here, just slower than you were. Dying of loneliness and grief and work that never ended. You brought me back to life." They kissed there in the church, a long, sweet kiss full of years of love and commitment and choosing each other every day. The years continued to pass. James grew tall and strong like his father, and when he was 16, he told Grant he wanted to learn everything about running the ranch. Grant could not have been more proud. Mary inherited her mother's love of learning and became a teacher herself, working in the school where Elena had once taught. Thomas, the youngest, had a gift with horses and spent his time training them, earning a reputation throughout the territory for his skill. Elena and Grant grew older together, their hair turning gray, lines deepening on their faces. But they still held hands, still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still looked at each other with the same love that had grown from that desperate proposal on a snowy December morning. When Arizona became a state in 1912, they celebrated with their whole family. James had married and given them 3 grandchildren. Mary had married a lawyer from Phoenix and had twin boys. Thomas was courting a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. Did you ever imagine this? Elena asked Grant as they watched their grandchildren playing in the yard. "When you carried me into that church, freezing and half dead, did you imagine this?" "No," Grant admitted. "I was just trying to save your life. The proposal was desperation, a way to protect your reputation. I thought we would be business partners at best, polite strangers sharing a house. Instead, we got this. Instead, we got everything." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, watching the children play. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. Half the town showed up, including many of Elena's former students, now grown with children of their own. They had cake and dancing, and the reverend's son, who had taken over when his father retired, said a blessing over them. 30 years ago, he said, my father married you in unusual circumstances. Some people said it would never last, that a marriage born of necessity could not become real love, but you proved them wrong. You showed all of us what commitment really means, what it looks like to choose each other every single day. Grant stood and pulled Elena to her feet. I want to say something, he said to the assembled crowd. Most of you know the story of how Elena and I met. How I found her freezing on the church steps during a blizzard, how we spent the night together in the church, how I proposed the next morning to protect her reputation. There were chuckles from the crowd. It was a story that had become legend in Fort McDowell. What you might not know is that I asked her to marry me, but she was the one who made it a real marriage. She was the one who decided we could be more than an arrangement. She was the one brave enough to take a chance on a lonely rancher with more cattle than conversation skills. More laughter, and Elena felt her eyes fill with tears. Elena, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning. You made me remember how to be happy. And I would go through that blizzard 1,000 times, would carry you into that church 1,000 times if it meant I got to spend my life with you. The crowd erupted in applause, and Elena stood and kissed him, not caring who was watching. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you too, always. The party lasted well into the night, and as Elena looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the friends and neighbors who had become family, at the town that had become home, She thought about how strange life was. How one broken stage and one terrible storm had led to everything she held dear. She thought about the scared, grieving woman she had been, stumbling through the snow toward what she thought would be safety. She had been looking for a teaching job, for a fresh start, for a way to survive. Instead, she had found Grant, and in finding him, she had found herself. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, coming to stand beside her as the party wound down. "About freezing on church steps," he smiled. "That was the best, worst day of my life. Mine, too." They helped clean up after the guests left, working together with the easy coordination of 30 years of partnership. Their children and grandchildren had gone home, and the house was quiet again. As they got ready for bed, Elena looked at Grant, really looked at him. He was 60 now, his hair completely gray, his face weathered from years of sun and wind. But his eyes were still that same striking blue, and when he looked at her, she still felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt that first Christmas Eve when she told him she wanted a real marriage. "No regrets?" he asked, as he sometimes did. "Not a single one," she answered, as she always did. They climbed into bed, the same bed they had shared for 30 years, and Grant pulled her close. Elena settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that same steady rhythm that had comforted her in the church during the storm. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For carrying me inside, for keeping me warm, for asking me to marry you, for building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes." He kissed her forehead. "For taking a chance on a desperate proposal from a stranger, for making our house a home, for giving me everything I never knew I needed." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful from it. The years continued their march. Grant and Elena grew older, but their love never diminished. They celebrated 40 years, then 45. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had. Elena's health began to fail when she was 78. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had lived a long and full life. Grant never left her side, caring for her with the same tenderness he had shown that first night in the church. "Do you remember," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "when you proposed? You said you were not asking for love, just a practical arrangement." "I remember. That was the worst proposal in the history of proposals." She was smiling, though, her eyes full of affection. "It worked, did it not?" "It did. Though I think we both knew even then that it was already more than practical. You do not ask someone to marry you just to save their reputation. You ask because something in you recognizes something in them." "You are probably right." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I think I fell in love with you the moment I brushed the snow off your face and saw you. I just did not have the words for it yet. I fell in love with you when you wrapped me in blankets and held me all night, keeping me alive. When you made me talk so I would not give up. That is when I knew you were someone special." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I am not afraid," Elena said quietly. "When the time comes, I am not afraid, because I have had a beautiful life, because I was loved and I loved in return, because of you." Grant's eyes filled with tears. "You are not going anywhere yet. I need you. You do not need me. You are the strongest man I know, but I hope you want me around a little longer." "I will always want you around." Elena lived 2 more years, long enough to see her great-grandson named after Grant, long enough to celebrate 52 years of marriage. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep with Grant holding her hand, the whole town mourned. Grant stood at her grave and spoke to the assembled crowd. 52 years ago, I found this woman freezing on church steps during a blizzard. I carried her inside, and in a moment of desperation or inspiration or fate, I asked her to marry me. She said yes, and that yes changed everything. It gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. Elena was the bravest, kindest, most beautiful person I have ever known, and I will miss her every day for the rest of my life. But I am grateful. So very grateful that the stage broke down, that the storm came, that I decided to check on my cattle that night, because it gave me her. And she was worth everything. Grant lived 3 more years, spending his time with his children and grandchildren, running the ranch with James, sitting on the porch in the evenings talking to Elena as if she were still there. Maybe she was. Maybe love like that never really ended. When he died at 81, his family buried him next to Elena. On the shared headstone, James had inscribed Grant Coleman and Elena Coleman. He carried her inside. She stayed forever. The church where they married still stood in Fort McDowell, though Reverend Patterson's son had long since retired, and a new pastor led the congregation. But the story of the cowboy and the schoolteacher lived on, told and retold, a reminder that love could come from the most unexpected places, that commitment and choice could become something deep and real and lasting. And on cold winter nights, when snow fell over Fort McDowell, people would sometimes look at the old church and remember the blizzard that had brought 2 strangers together, the desperate proposal that had changed 2 lives, and the love that had grown from it all. They would remember that sometimes the best things in life came not from careful planning or perfect circumstances, but from taking a chance, from saying yes to possibility, from choosing to believe that something good could come from something unexpected. Grant and Elena's story became part of the town's history, passed down through generations. Their descendants still lived in Fort McDowell, still ran the ranch, still taught in the school. And sometimes, on the anniversary of that fateful blizzard, they would gather at the church and tell the story again, of the woman who nearly froze and the man who saved her, of the proposal that should not have worked but did, of the love that grew from necessity into something beautiful and true and lasting. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not how they started, but what they built. Not the desperation of that first night, but the 52 years that followed. Not the practical arrangement, but the deep, abiding love that had carried them through everything life threw at them. Grant had carried Elena inside the church to save her life. But she had saved his right back, filling his empty house and lonely heart with warmth and laughter and love. They had saved each other, really, in all the ways that mattered, and that, more than anything, was the true story. Not of a desperate proposal or a marriage of convenience, but of 2 people who found each other in a storm and decided to weather all the rest of life's storms together. 2 people who chose each other, first out of necessity, then out of growing affection, and finally out of deep and lasting love. Their love story was not perfect or conventional, but it was real, and it lasted. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?